She never imagined that a run-down, abandoned hotel would hold more than just dust and decay. But when Marley Reyes unlocked the garage door, she found a hidden treasure trove of luxury 50 exotic cars worth over $65 million. What seemed like a simple investment turned into the discovery of a lifetime. But the question remained, who left these priceless machines behind, and why? Before we dive into Marley's unbelievable journey, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if stories like this excite you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just be more jaw-dropping than today's. Let's get started. The air was thick with dust as Marley Reyes stood in front of the rusted metal gates of the abandoned hotel. The towering, crumbling structure loomed before her like a forgotten relic of the past, its cracked windows and peeling paint telling stories of a once thriving business long gone to rot. But for Marley, it was a new beginning. She brushed a lock of dark hair out of her face, tucking it behind her ear, and adjusted the worn leather jacket she had thrown on this morning. Her jeans, though stained with oil and dirt from countless days spent under car hoods, still managed to fit her perfectly, and the faint sound of the city's hustle was just out of earshot. This place, this graveyard of the past, was the perfect opportunity. For years, Marley had dreamed of owning her own garage, a place where she could finally be in control of her destiny. And while most people wouldn't have looked twice at this dilapidated hotel, Marley saw potential. A place to build something of her own, away from the shadows of her past. It had cost her everything, every dollar she'd saved, every ounce of risk she was willing to take, but today, this was her new life. She had spent the last few months searching for the perfect location, and when this old hotel came up for sale at a price so low it felt like a steal, Marley didn't hesitate. The locals laughed when they found out. "A mechanic buying an old hotel?" they'd said. "You're crazy, girl." But she wasn't crazy. She was determined. Marley had spent her entire life working with her hands, fixing broken engines, restoring cars that most people wouldn't touch. There was something about the challenge, about making something that was once forgotten into something beautiful again. That's what she was hoping to do here. The hotel wasn't just a place, it was a blank canvas, a massive building that could be transformed into something powerful. As she approached the front doors, her boots clicking against the cracked pavement, she could already imagine what it would look like. A new shop, a workshop where she could finally let her passion thrive. Maybe the garage would be small at first, but it would grow. She had a vision, and she wasn't about to let anyone stop her. With a deep breath, Marley unlocked the door to the hotel and stepped inside. The musty scent of mildew and rotting wood filled the air, but Marley didn't mind. It was the smell of something waiting to be brought back to life. The building was huge, with long hallways and spacious rooms, all of them covered in dust and debris. But Marley's eyes immediately went to the back of the hotel, where she noticed an old set of steel doors that didn't quite fit into the rest of the architecture. They looked out of place. Her curiosity piqued. She made her way toward them. The handle was cold and stiff in her hand as she pulled it open, revealing a massive garage hidden within. Her breath caught in her throat as the sight before her took her by surprise. Rows of cars, exotic, high-end vehicles stood covered in dust, abandoned in the shadows. A Ferrari, a Lamborghini, a sleek Bugatti, and others whose names Marley could only guess from their shapes. There were at least 50 cars in this enormous space, and each one seemed to gleam under the dim light, as though they were waiting for someone to give them a second chance. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Luxury cars, worth millions of dollars, sitting here in the middle of nowhere. The mystery of it all flooded her mind. Who had owned these cars? Why had they been left behind? And most of all, why had no one come to claim them? Marley stepped further into the garage, her eyes scanning the space in disbelief. These cars weren't just old, they were valuable, each one a piece of history. And now, they were hers. But why? What was the story behind this hidden treasure? With each step she took, Marley felt a rising sense of wonder and excitement, but also a deep curiosity. She had no idea who had left them here, but something told her that this discovery would change her life forever. as the sunlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the garage just enough for her to see every curve of each car. Marley knew one thing for sure. She had just unlocked a mystery that would take her on a journey far beyond anything she had ever imagined. Marley sat in the corner of the dimly lit garage, eyes wide, scanning the room in disbelief. The grandeur of the vehicles before her seemed almost surreal. The Ferrari was sleek, its red paint still vibrant despite years of neglect. The Lamborghini had sharp, aggressive lines, its black exterior untouched by time. If it weren't for the layer of dust on every surface, it would almost look brand new. The Bugatti, with its signature curves, seemed like a dream frozen in time, its chrome accents glinting like the last glimmer of hope in a forgotten space. But it wasn't just the cars, it was the sheer number of them. 50 luxury vehicles, each one worth more than the house she had just invested in, sitting in a garage like this. She ran her fingers through her hair, a wave of confusion sweeping over her. What kind of person leaves these behind? It didn't make sense. No one would abandon such precious machines. Not unless there was a story behind them. A story she was determined to uncover. Marley stood up, her boots crunching against the gravel floor. She crossed the garage, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the vast abandoned space. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of old leather and gas filled her nose. But the garage itself was surprisingly well maintained. For a place that had clearly been forgotten by the world, it was in good shape. It almost felt like the cars had just been parked here waiting for someone to come and take them for a spin again. She moved closer to one of the cars, a Rolls-Royce with a gleaming silver grille. It was beautiful, almost too perfect to be real. But there was no denying the wear in its tires, the dust covering the windows. Whoever owned these cars had been gone for a while. The longer Marley looked, the more questions piled up in her mind. Why hadn't anyone come to take these cars? And why had they been left in such an out-of-place location? Her heart raced as she continued to explore the space. She could see that the cars had been placed carefully, as if someone had taken time to store them properly, even though the garage itself was crumbling around them. A single dim light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows over the polished bodies of the cars, making the entire scene feel like a forgotten dream. Then, as she walked toward the back of the garage, something caught her eye. It was a large, rusted filing cabinet tucked into a corner, almost hidden by the layers of dust and cobwebs. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she pulled it open. Inside, there were stacks of yellowing papers, some marked with symbols Marley didn't recognize, others simply old invoices and receipts that seemed like nothing more than junk. But then, she found something different. A small leather-bound journal, its edges worn with age. She flipped it open carefully, not knowing what she might find inside. The first few pages were filled with scribbled notes, but the handwriting was erratic, almost frantic. There were names she didn't recognize, references to places Marley had never heard of, and dates that seemed out of sync with the rest of the notes. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages, her heart pounding faster with every word. The journal hinted at something bigger, something deeper than just a collection of rare cars. It spoke of plans, of business deals that never came to fruition, and of a man who had once been wealthy beyond measure, only to lose everything in the blink of an eye. The journal didn't just detail the cars, it detailed the life of the previous owner. A man who had vanished as quickly as he had risen to fame. Marley's mind raced. The story behind the cars was still a mystery, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about wealth. There was something more at play here. Something that tied these cars, this hotel, and the man who had owned it all together in ways she hadn't yet begun to understand. She tucked the journal into her jacket and stood up, glancing once more at the cars before her. They were more than just luxury, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Marley had every intention of solving it. The question wasn't just about how these cars had ended up here, it was about why, and she was determined to find out. Marley spent the following days scouring every inch of the abandoned hotel, trying to piece together the puzzle she had uncovered. The garage was far more than she had expected, and the journal had only deepened the mystery. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of something huge, a secret tied to the cars, the hotel, and the man who had owned them all. She had already contacted a few friends in the mechanic community for help with the cars, but her mind kept returning to the journal. The entries were too cryptic to make sense of entirely. Whoever had written them seemed to be deliberately hiding something, though Marley couldn't understand why. She had to know more. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the city's hum faded into the night, Marley sat in the corner of the garage, the journal spread out before her. She had already read through the pages several times, but something about it still nagged at her. There was more she wasn't seeing. The entry spoke of a man named Gregory Roth, a businessman who had once been one of the wealthiest men in the country, known for his extravagant taste and numerous luxury car collections. Roth had built the hotel as a personal retreat, a place to escape the pressures of his empire. But the journal painted a different picture, a picture of someone who had made dangerous enemies. It seemed that Roth had always been looking over his shoulder, hinting at the fact that his wealth came at a price. Marley paused as she turned the page, her eyes locking onto a date she hadn't noticed before. It was marked with a bold red ink, February 12th, 2013. The entry that followed seemed like a confession. I've made too many deals I can't walk away from. I've invested in too many things that have cost me more than just money. These cars, they are my final legacy. I need to disappear before they come for me. Her heart skipped a beat. These weren't the words of someone simply losing money, they were the words of someone on the run. And the cars, all 50 of them, had been left behind as if they were a way to safeguard something precious, something Roth was willing to leave behind in order to protect himself. Marley's mind raced. Could it be? Could these cars, this hotel, be connected to something much darker than she had imagined? The thought that Gregory Roth had hidden them here to escape some kind of threat made her stomach churn. There were too many questions swirling in her head now. She needed to find out who Roth had been running from. The next day, Marley decided to take a more direct approach. She needed to find out what had happened to Roth and whether there were any living relatives or associates who could shed light on the situation. After all, she couldn't hold on to the cars forever, not without knowing the full story. If Roth had disappeared for good, then what right did she have to keep them? But if there was more to the story, if Roth had been hiding from something dangerous, then maybe those cars weren't just valuable assets, they were a warning. She started by tracking down old news articles, digging through archives in the local library. What she found only raised more questions. Gregory Roth had been a name tied to scandal, luxury, and even criminal investigations. However, there were no clear records of him ever being found. No obituary, no death notice, just silence. Marley's search led her down a trail that suggested Roth had disappeared in 2013, right around the time he'd left the cryptic journal entry. As she pieced the puzzle together, one thing became clear. Gregory Roth had vanished off the map, but his legacy and these cars had not. It seemed that Marley had stumbled into the middle of something much larger than she could have ever imagined. The more she thought about it, the more the garage felt like a trap, a warning hidden in plain sight. Was this luxury collection just a decoy? Were these cars a cover for something far more valuable or more dangerous, hidden within the hotel's walls? The tension in the air thickened. Marley could feel the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. The garage was no longer just a place to store cars. It was a mystery that could unravel everything, and Marley was at the center of it all. Marley couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper she dug into Gregory Roth's life, the more she was being pulled into a web she couldn't untangle. The hotel, the cars, the cryptic journal it was, all beginning to feel like a tangled mess of secrets that someone wanted to keep buried. But the more she uncovered, the more she knew she couldn't stop now. She had to know the truth, no matter how dangerous it might get. The following morning, Marley returned to the hotel, the journal clenched tightly in her hand. She needed to search for more clues. If Roth had hidden these cars in plain sight, surely there was more to find. She made her way to the hotel's upper floors, which were in even worse condition than the rest of the building. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled musty, as if the place hadn't seen a living soul in years. The further she walked down the dark, narrow hallways, the more she felt like she was trespassing in a forgotten world. But something about the emptiness called to her, like the building was whispering its secrets just beneath the surface. It was the 5th room she'd checked that stopped her in her tracks. Tucked away at the far end of the hallway, the door creaked open as Marley pushed it with her shoulder, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside was a dusty office, its furniture old but carefully arranged, almost as though someone had tried to preserve it. There was an antique desk in the middle, with stacks of papers piled high, some of them completely untouched, others half-finished and left in haste. But what caught her attention was the large leather-bound book sitting on the desk. It looked old, older than anything else in the room. Its cover was cracked, the gold lettering barely legible, but when Marley opened it, she immediately knew she had found something important. The pages were filled with hand-drawn sketches, detailed blueprints, and records that seemed to document not just the hotel's construction, but the luxurious collection of cars Roth had gathered over the years. She carefully flipped through the pages, pausing when she came across a set of sketches that were far more detailed than anything she had seen before. They weren't just drawings of cars, they were blueprints of the hotel itself. But what caught her eye was a specific floor plan of the building's underground levels, which Marley hadn't even realized existed. She traced the lines with her finger. There was something strange about the design, a hidden room, tucked away beneath the hotel's foundation, a place that hadn't been mentioned anywhere else in the building's history, a place that seemed almost deliberately concealed. Marley's heart pounded as she examined the plans. Whoever had built this hotel, whoever had hidden these cars here, had gone to great lengths to keep everything under wraps. It was clear that Roth had known something was coming. He had prepared, he had planned for something. But what? And then it hit her. If there was a hidden room beneath the hotel, that meant there was something else hidden with it. Something else Roth had wanted to protect. But what? Her breath quickened as she glanced at the journal, wondering if the answer might be somewhere within its pages. She flipped to the last entry she had read, the one that mentioned Roth's fear of enemies coming for him. Was the hidden room a safe haven? Or was it something darker? Something Roth had been trying to protect from those who had been hunting him. Marley couldn't wait any longer. She had to find this underground room. She had to know what Roth had hidden. Later that evening, under the cover of darkness, Marley returned to the hotel with a flashlight in hand and a crowbar tucked into her bag. She headed straight for the area of the building where the blueprints had indicated the hidden room might be. It was in the farthest corner of the lower level, far away from the prying eyes of the street. She felt a mix of excitement and fear as she began searching for any sign of a hidden passage. She checked the walls, tapping lightly, listening for any hollow sounds. When nothing revealed itself, she moved to the floor. The sound of her tapping echoed in the empty space until click. Her fingers froze. There it was, a faint, almost imperceptible difference in the sound of the floor. Her heart raced. Marley dropped to her knees and began pulling at the loose, weathered floorboards. Underneath, she found a trap door, heavy and sealed shut by years of neglect. With a grunt, she wedged the crowbar into the crack and pried it open. Dust and old, stale air rushed up from the darkness beneath. What lay below was a narrow stone staircase that spiraled into a pitch-black abyss. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of what she was about to uncover settling over her. But Marley didn't hesitate long. She had come too far. Taking a deep breath, she descended into the unknown, the light from her flashlight barely cutting through the thick darkness that enveloped her. Each step felt heavier than the last as she ventured deeper into the hidden underbelly of the hotel. The air was cold, thick with the smell of mildew and rot. But there, at the bottom of the stairs, something glittered in the dark. Her flashlight landed on something unexpected, a row of metal doors, each sealed tightly. She reached out to touch one, her pulse quickening. Behind these doors, she knew, was the heart of the mystery, and it was waiting for her. The metal doors loomed before Marley, each one heavy and seemingly impenetrable. Her heart raced as she ran her fingers along the cool, rusted edges, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But the thrill of discovery, of unraveling the secrets Gregory Roth had left behind, was too much to ignore. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. Marley took a steadying breath and pushed one of the doors open. It creaked and groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the silent, damp corridors beneath the hotel. A faint light flickered above her as she stepped inside, her boots crunching on the gravel-covered floor. The room beyond the doors was massive, larger than any of the other rooms she had explored in the hotel. And in the center, partially covered by tarps and dust, was something that made her pulse quicken. More cars. Not just the luxury collection she had already found, but even more. These were different, though. The models were older, rarer, with custom features and unique designs. Cars that looked more like works of art than machines. There were vintage Rolls-Royces, classic Mercedes-Benzes, and some she couldn't even identify, all seemingly untouched by time. She moved toward them, her hands trembling as she ran her fingers along their sleek, polished surfaces. Her eyes moved over the room, noticing the quiet stillness of it all. The cars were tucked in carefully, as if waiting for someone who would never come back to take them for a spin. Marley felt a sense of awe, mixed with an underlying unease. What was this place? Why had Roth gone to such lengths to conceal it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from behind her. She spun around, heart racing, the flashlight trembling in her hand. A man stood in the doorway, tall, with a strong presence that sent a shiver down her spine. His sharp, cold eyes studied her with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said, his voice low and smooth. But curiosity can be dangerous. Marley froze, her mind working overtime to process the situation. The man's appearance was unsettling, too polished for this kind of place. His dark suit contrasted sharply with the rust and decay of the hotel. There was no mistaking it. This man wasn't someone who belonged in a forgotten corner of a decaying building. He was someone who belonged in a world of high stakes and dangerous deals. "And who are you?" Marley asked, trying to keep her voice steady, her fingers clenched around the flashlight, ready to defend herself if necessary. "My name is Sebastian Crane," the man said, his lips curling into a small smile. "I've been keeping an eye on this place for some time now. I see you've stumbled upon my interest." Marley's eyes narrowed. "Your interest?" Crane stepped further into the room, his gaze flickering to the cars, then back to her. "Yes, these cars, this collection, belong to someone important. Someone who is deeply involved in things far beyond just collecting luxury vehicles. They're not just cars, you see. They're assets. And I've been waiting for the right moment to claim them." "Claim them?" Marley echoed, the realization dawning on her. This man wasn't just a collector. He was someone who had been watching the hotel, waiting for it to change hands. And now, it seemed, he was making his move. Sebastian paused, his smile turning into something more calculating. "I think you're in over your head, Miss Reyes. These cars are worth millions, more than you could ever imagine. And I'm prepared to offer you something in exchange for them." Marley crossed her arms, her stance defensive. "And what exactly do you want, in exchange?" Crane's eyes sparkled with amusement as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I'm willing to make you an offer you can't refuse. All of this, these cars, this hotel, the entire collection can be yours. In return, I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Money, power, influence. You'll be able to build the empire you've always dreamed of. But you need to make a choice." Marley's chest tightened. She wasn't stupid. This was a business transaction, but it was laced with danger. She had seen enough to know that Crane was no ordinary businessman. He was playing a game, and Marley was just a pawn, or so he thought. "Why would you offer all of this to me?" Marley asked, trying to hold her ground. Crane smiled again, but this time it was colder. "Because I know what these cars mean to you. I know what you've been trying to build. I'm offering you the chance to make it happen faster, without the struggle, without the setbacks. All you need to do is hand over the cars, and I'll make sure you never have to work another day in your life." The weight of his words hung in the air. It was tempting, more tempting than anything Marley had ever been offered before, but something in her gut told her to be careful. The cars, the hotel, and Crane, everything felt like a carefully constructed trap, and she wasn't about to walk into it blindly. "I'm not interested in your offer," Marley said firmly, her voice unwavering despite the pressure building inside her. "These cars don't belong to you. They don't belong to anyone who thinks they can just buy their way in. I'm keeping them." Crane's expression hardened, and for a brief moment, Marley thought she saw a flicker of something darker in his eyes. But then he laughed softly, almost mockingly. "As you wish, Miss Reyes," he said, turning toward the door. "But don't think you've seen the last of me. These cars, this hotel, and whatever secrets lie within, they all belong to someone far more powerful than you can imagine. And one day, you'll realize that you can't hide from it." With that, he left, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. Marley stood there for a moment, her heart still racing. The tension in the room hadn't dissipated, but something had shifted. She had made her choice. The cars were hers, and no one was going to take them from her. Marley spent the following days in a haze of uncertainty and determination. Sebastian Crane's offer echoed in her mind, his words heavy with threat. She knew she had made the right choice in rejecting him, but that didn't stop the unease that had settled deep in her chest. There was something sinister about Crane's presence, something dangerous she couldn't quite put her finger on. He had made it clear that the cars weren't just assets. They were symbols of something much bigger, something she hadn't yet fully understood. She was no stranger to danger. As a mechanic, she had dealt with her share of shady characters over the years, people who tried to cut corners or get cheap repairs for cars that should have been scrapped long ago. But this was different. Crane wasn't just some sleazy customer. He was someone who moved in powerful circles, someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. The threat of his interest in the cars felt more like a looming storm, quiet, but deadly. Marley couldn't afford to let her guard down. And yet, despite the tension building around her, she found herself drawn back to the garage, to the cars, to the mystery of it all. Every inch of the space felt like it held a secret, like the walls, the floor, even the dust had been carefully placed to conceal something. The deeper she dug, the more she knew that Gregory Roth hadn't just hidden the cars here to preserve his wealth. There was something more to this collection. Something she had to uncover. She was in the middle of examining one of the vintage cars, an old Mercedes with a gleaming hood ornament, when she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just another curious local stopping by to see the garage. But then she heard the sharp sound of a door slamming, followed by the heavy footsteps of someone approaching. She turned just in time to see a familiar face standing in the doorway, Detective Harris. He had been visiting her off and on for the past week, asking questions about the hotel and the cars. At first, Marley had been cooperative, answering his questions without much thought. But with Crane's offer weighing on her mind, she began to wonder if the detective was more involved in the situation than he let on. Harris was tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as he stepped inside. His expression was grim, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something far more serious. "Marley," he greeted her with a nod, though there was no warmth in his voice. "We need to talk." Marley tensed, wiping her hands on her work pants as she gave him a wary look. "About what?" "The cars," he said, his voice low and measured. "I've been digging into Gregory Roth's past, and things aren't adding up. You're not the only one interested in those vehicles. The city's been watching this hotel for years, and now that it's changed hands, they're starting to ask questions. Questions I'm not sure I have answers to." Marley's stomach twisted. "You're telling me the city's involved now?" Harris glanced around the garage, his eyes scanning the cars with a mix of awe and suspicion. "It's not just the city. There are people, powerful people, who have been trying to get their hands on these cars for a long time. People who have connections far beyond what you or I could even imagine." Marley took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What do you mean? What are you not telling me? Harris hesitated, clearly weighing his words. I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but you're already in deeper than you realize. This isn't just about some abandoned cars. Roth wasn't just a businessman. He had ties to some very dangerous people. People who specialize in things much darker than luxury car collections. Marley's heart skipped a beat. What kind of people? The kind that don't take no for an answer, Harris replied, his voice grim. Roth's dealings were tied to illegal activities, money laundering, arms deals, and something much worse that I haven't been able to trace. The cars were just a front. The real value lies in what he was hiding behind them. Marley felt a chill run down her spine. The mystery that had seemed so thrilling just days ago now felt like a curse. The cars, the hotel, even the journal, it was all part of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. And now, it seemed, there were people who would stop at nothing to reclaim what Roth had left behind. You need to be careful, Harris warned, stepping closer. You've already drawn attention, and there are people who won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to get what they want. I don't know if I can protect you from them, but I can tell you one thing, this is far from over. Marley swallowed hard, her hands suddenly trembling. She thought of the offer Crane had made, the promises of power, of riches. It had all seemed so tempting, but now she understood why he had made it. He wasn't offering her the world. He was trying to control it. I didn't ask for this, she muttered, more to herself than to Harris. I just wanted to fix things. I just wanted to build something for myself. I know, Harris said softly, his expression sympathetic. But sometimes, the things we stumble into aren't so easy to walk away from, and in this case, it might be too late. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and Marley felt the full force of the situation settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She wasn't just fixing cars. She was sitting on a ticking time bomb, surrounded by people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And the only question left was, would she survive long enough to figure out what Roth had left behind? The days following her conversation with Detective Harris were filled with a sense of unease that Marley couldn't shake. The once exciting prospect of uncovering a hidden treasure in the form of luxury cars had taken a dark turn. Now, it seemed like every move she made was watched, and the stakes of what she had stumbled upon were higher than she had ever imagined. Still, she couldn't walk away, not now. The garage, those cars, and the journal Roth had left behind were part of something much larger, something that called to her. It wasn't just about fixing broken engines or collecting rare vehicles. It was about uncovering a legacy, a story that had been buried beneath layers of secrets for too long. Marley returned to the hotel, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew there were more answers to be found. If Gregory Roth had hidden these cars for a reason, then she was going to find out what that reason was. But this time, she would proceed with caution, knowing there were others dangerous people who would stop at nothing to control the legacy Roth had left behind. She went back to the underground garage where the cars rested, now more aware than ever of the weight that lay in each gleaming, forgotten vehicle. As she walked among the collection, the old Mercedes that had caught her attention earlier seemed to call to her. She ran her hand along its polished surface again, her fingers brushing the cool metal. It was a work of art, but something about it felt more than just valuable. It felt significant. Marley climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of leather filling her nostrils. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the garage settle around her. There was something meditative about the way the cars seemed to breathe in the stillness. The garage wasn't just a hiding place for vehicles, it was a sanctuary. It was where the story of Roth's life had played out, and where Marley's own story was now unfolding. She reached over to the glove box, pulling it open. Inside was a collection of documents, papers, so old and brittle they threatened to crumble as soon as she touched them. Marley's heart skipped as she sifted through the papers, one of them catching her eye. A faded photograph of a younger Roth, standing beside a beautiful woman. They were smiling, their arms wrapped around each other in a warm embrace. Behind them was a sprawling estate, with a fleet of luxury cars parked in neat rows. This photo wasn't just a snapshot. It was a window into the past, Roth's past. And from the way the cars were arranged, it looked like this had been taken long before the hotel had ever been built. It was a time of wealth and power, a time when Roth had been at the top of his game, but something about the photo felt off. The woman in the picture, she looked so familiar, but Marley couldn't place her. Something in her gut told her that she had seen her before. Maybe in the journal, or perhaps even among the documents Marley had found. Her name was just out of reach, but Marley's instincts told her that she was part of the story, part of whatever dark history Roth had been running from. As Marley continued to sort through the papers, her hand landed on another photograph. This one was different. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance, showing Roth talking to a group of men. Their faces were mostly obscured, but one stood out. A tall, imposing figure with sharp features and a cold expression. Marley recognized him instantly. It was Sebastian Crane, the same man who had approached her with the offer to buy the cars. Her stomach twisted. Crane had been tied to this from the very beginning. This wasn't just a matter of him being interested in the cars. He was connected to Roth's past in ways that Marley hadn't yet fully understood. But she was starting to piece it together. Crane wasn't just a businessman. He was part of the dangerous network that had once backed Roth. And now, it seemed, he was coming for what was left of Roth's empire. Marley's mind raced. She needed to find out more about Crane, about his involvement in Roth's life, and most importantly, what had happened to Roth. She couldn't just sit here and wait for Crane to make his next move. The puzzle was nearly complete, and she was determined to solve it, no matter the cost. But as she closed the glove box and stood up to leave, a voice from the shadows stopped her in her tracks. "You're digging too deep, Marley." Marley spun around, heart pounding. There, leaning against the doorway, was Detective Harris. But this time, he didn't look like the ally he had once seemed to be. His face was hard, his eyes cold, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, two men stood, dressed in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. "What's going on, Harris?" Marley demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for the wrench she kept on the workbench nearby. "I thought you were trying to help me. Why are you here?" Harris's lips twitched into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been trying to protect you, Marley, but you don't seem to understand the danger you're in. You've opened a door that you can't close." The two men behind him stepped forward, and Marley instinctively backed away. She wasn't sure who they were, but she knew they weren't here to talk. The situation was escalating quickly, and Marley felt her heart race as the room seemed to close in on her. "I don't know what you're involved in, Harris," Marley said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "But I won't back down. I'll figure this out on my own." Harris's gaze hardened. "You think you can control this? You think you can just walk away from what you've uncovered? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Marley took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the wrench. "I'm done with secrets," she said, her voice sharp. "And I'm done letting people like you control me." She knew then that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The story she had uncovered was about to get even darker, and she was in deeper than she ever could have prepared for. The air in the garage was thick with tension, each breath Marley took feeling heavier than the last. Detective Harris and his two companions stood like silent sentinels, their cold stares never leaving her. She could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on her, but she refused to show fear. She had made up her mind she wouldn't let them take control of this. She wouldn't let them take the cars, her discovery, or her future. "What's it going to be, Marley?" Harris asked, his voice low and measured. "You can keep digging, but you're going to find things that you can't unsee. Things you don't want to know. You're out of your depth." Marley stood tall, the wrench in her hand a small comfort, but she felt the power in it. The power that came from knowing the truth, from understanding that she had control over her own choices. "I'm not scared of what's buried here, Harris, and I won't be intimidated by you or anyone else." For a long moment, there was only silence. A silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then one of the men behind Harris stepped forward. He was tall, his face stern, his posture rigid. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice cold. "This isn't just about cars or a hotel. This is about power. People who've been waiting for the right moment to take what's theirs." Marley's heart skipped a beat. The man's words were like a warning. But she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she was this close to uncovering the full extent of what Gregory Roth had left behind. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not going to let people like you walk all over me either. These cars, this hotel, they're mine. And I'm not going to let anyone take them from me. Not you, not Crane, and not anyone else." Harris narrowed his eyes, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He wasn't going to give up easily. But Marley wasn't about to give up either. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of something violent, something inevitable. She didn't know what Harris and his companions were really after. But one thing was clear. They wanted the cars. And they would stop at nothing to get them. "What's your game here, Harris?" Marley asked, taking a step closer to him. "What do you want? Money? Power? Because I'm not giving you either. You're working for someone, aren't you? Someone who wants control of everything here." Harris's eyes flickered briefly, and for a split second, Marley saw a flash of uncertainty. Then he regained his composure, and his gaze hardened. "I'm not working for anyone," he said, though the words sounded rehearsed. "I'm just here to make sure things don't spiral out of control. You don't know what's at stake." Marley didn't buy it. She could sense it now, the crack in his armor. He was lying. But why? "Tell me what you're really involved in, Harris," Marley pressed. "Who's pulling the strings? Why do they want the car so badly? What's in them?" For a moment, it seemed like Harris might break. But then the silence shattered with a sound that made Marley's heart leap in her chest. The rev of an engine. The unmistakable roar of a powerful, expensive car. The unmistakable roar of a car that belonged in this garage. The sound grew louder, closer. Marley's eyes shot to the door of the garage, and she saw headlights shining through the cracks. Someone was coming. Someone who had heard the commotion. Someone who wasn't about to let Marley stand alone in this battle. "Get ready," Harris growled, his voice tense. "You've just made things a lot more complicated for yourself." The car screeched to a halt outside the garage, and Marley's pulse quickened. She knew who it was before the door swung open and the figure stepped out. It was Sebastian Crane. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his movements smooth and confident as he strode into the garage. His eyes flickered over to Marley, then to Harris and his companions, his lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. Well, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I must say, Marley, I'm impressed. You've managed to stir up quite a mess. But it's time for you to understand one thing. You don't get to control this. You never did." Marley clenched her fists, her jaw tight. "I won't let you take what's mine," she said, her voice firm. "You can't have these cars. You can't have this hotel." Crane's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with something dark. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about what's yours or mine. This is about power. And in the end, power always wins." He stepped forward, and the two men behind Harris flanked him, forming a barrier between Marley and the door. There was no way out, no way to escape. The walls of the garage seemed to close in on her. "You've made your choice, Marley," Crane continued. "Now you'll pay the price." The tension in the room was unbearable. Marley could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She was caught in a battle that was bigger than her, bigger than the cars, and bigger than the hotel. She had no choice but to stand her ground. But just as Crane took another step forward, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. A police car screeched to a halt outside the garage. Harris's expression faltered. He wasn't prepared for this. The garage doors crashed open, and more officers flooded into the room. The men in suits froze, their hands instinctively moving toward their jackets. "Get on the ground," one of the officers shouted. Chaos erupted as the officers moved in, guns drawn, taking control of the situation in an instant. Crane's confident facade shattered, as he realized the tables had turned. Marley watched, her heart pounding, as the men were apprehended, their attempts at resistance futile against the police's overwhelming force. Detective Harris, too, was taken into custody, his expression one of disbelief. As the dust settled, Marley stood in the center of the garage, breathing heavily. She had survived the battle, but at what cost? The cars, the hotel, and the mystery surrounding them weren't over. But Marley knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let anyone take away what she had fought so hard to protect. The air felt different now. The tension that had once been a constant, suffocating pressure seemed to dissipate, replaced with a quiet, uneasy calm. Marley stood amidst the chaos, her hands still trembling, her heart still racing. She had survived. Yes, but the battle was far from over. Detective Harris and his associates were gone, arrested and taken away by the officers. But that didn't mean the threat had vanished entirely. Sebastian Crane, though captured, was only the tip of the iceberg. There were still people out there, people with far more power, far more reach, who wanted the collection that had been hidden beneath the hotel. She stared at the half-empty garage, the luxury cars now under police custody, and their glossy surfaces, no longer the gleaming promises of wealth and power, but mere reminders of the price Marley had paid to uncover their secrets. But at least, she had control now. The cars weren't in Crane's hands. The hotel was hers. She had won, for now, but the victory tasted bitter. What had it cost her? Her peace of mind? Her safety? Her trust in the people around her? Marley had never set out to be part of something so vast, so dangerous. She had just wanted to fix cars, to build something from the ground up, a place that could finally be her own. But now, standing here in the silence of the garage, she wondered if it was all worth it. She thought of the things she had learned about Gregory Roth, about his dealings, about the dangerous men who had been watching this place for years. She thought of Crane's cold, calculating smile, of Harris's sudden turn against her. She thought of the legacy Roth had left behind, of the cars, the hotel, and the carefully crafted illusion of power that had been built around them. Was it all just a trap? A game played by those with more wealth and influence than she could ever understand? Marley closed her eyes for a moment, shaking her head as if trying to clear the doubt that had begun to settle in. She had to focus. She had to remember why she started this in the first place. It wasn't about the power, or the money, or the danger. It was about the cars. It was about restoring something beautiful, something forgotten, and giving it new life. And that's exactly what she was going to do. Later that evening, after the last of the officers had left and the garage was quiet once more, Marley returned to the hotel. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she had first walked through those crumbling doors. The idea of turning it into her own dream garage, still so fresh and distant. But now, after everything that had happened, it felt different. It felt like hers in a way it hadn't before. The weight of the cars, the legacy of Gregory Roth, still hung over the place, but Marley was determined to reclaim it. She had saved these vehicles, not for the money, but for the story they held, for the people they had once belonged to. She would restore them not just as machines, but as memories, as legacies. She stood in front of one of the cars, a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, its sleek lines calling out to her like a work of art. She ran her fingers along the hood, her mind clear for the first time in days. It was time to get to work. She had a garage to build, a collection to restore, and a future to create, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. The next day, Marley started making plans. She hired a small team of mechanics, some she had worked with before, others new faces, eager to help bring her vision to life. The garage would no longer be just a space to work on cars. It would be a place for something greater. It would be a sanctuary for those who shared her passion, a place to restore not just cars, but dreams. But the legacy of Gregory Roth lingered. There were still questions to be answered. The money laundering, the dark ties that had bound him to dangerous people, The hidden secrets locked away beneath the hotel. Marley knew she couldn't let it all go. There were answers out there, and one day, she would find them. But for now, she focused on what she could control. The cars, the garage, the future she was building. As the weeks passed, the garage began to take shape. Marley worked tirelessly, restoring each car with precision and care, pouring her heart into every detail. The cars were more than just machines to her now. They were symbols of everything she had fought for. The legacy of Roth, the danger, the intrigue, had all become part of her story, but they didn't define her. One afternoon, as Marley stood in front of a newly restored Lamborghini Miura, its engine purring like a satisfied beast, she looked around at the garage. It was buzzing with life now, her team, the cars, the hum of engines being brought back to life. It felt like home. And then, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You've done it, haven't you?" Detective Harris's voice was low, but his presence was undeniable. He stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Marley turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "I've done what I had to do," she replied, her voice steady. "But you haven't answered my question. What was all of this about, Harris? Why did you get involved?" Harris took a step closer, his eyes softening just a fraction. "I didn't want you to get dragged into something you weren't prepared for, Marley. But you're right. There's more to the story. Gregory Roth's ties run deep. And Crane, well, he's just the beginning. But you're right about one thing: you did it your way. And that's something I didn't expect." Marley shook her head, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You should have been honest with me. I trusted you." Harris nodded, the weight of his past actions hanging in the air between them. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But you've done something bigger than I ever imagined. You've taken control of your own destiny." Marley looked at the restored cars around her and then back at Harris. "I'm not done yet. There's still more to uncover. But for now, this is mine." Harris gave her a small, resigned smile before turning to leave. "Just be careful, Marley. Not everyone will let you walk away from this without a fight." As he disappeared into the distance, Marley turned back to the garage, her eyes scanning the cars, each one a testament to her perseverance. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Marley felt like she was in control. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Marley had turned the once-abandoned hotel into a thriving garage, its walls now alive with the hum of work, the clatter of tools, and the rich scent of motor oil and leather. The luxury cars were no longer just relics of the past. They were her future, carefully restored and waiting to be shown to the world. Each car she brought back to life was a victory, not just for her skill as a mechanic, but for her unyielding determination to carve out a place for herself, no matter the cost. But despite the success, the lingering shadows of the past never quite faded. Every now and then, Marley would look over her shoulder, certain that someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The legacy of Gregory Roth, the dangerous people connected to him, and the enigma of Sebastian Crane still haunted her, lurking just beneath the surface. One afternoon, as Marley worked on a vintage Porsche, polishing its gleaming silver exterior, a familiar sound caught her attention. The roar of an engine, powerful and unmistakable, echoed from the street outside. She stood up, wiping her hands on her work apron, her heart skipping a beat. The engine grew louder, and she felt a twinge of apprehension. The sleek black sports car pulled into the lot and came to a stop right in front of the garage. Marley's pulse quickened as she recognized the vehicle. It was Crane's car, the one he had arrived in that night, so full of arrogance and menace. She took a step back, her instincts flaring as the door to the car swung open. Out stepped Sebastian Crane, dressed in his signature sharp suit, his cold gaze sweeping over the garage. He moved with the same predatory grace as before, but there was something different this time. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced with something darker, something more dangerous. "Marley," he said, his voice smooth and calculating. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." Marley crossed her arms, standing her ground. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling, Crane." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here to sell you anything. In fact, I've come to offer you something." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "A chance to get out. To leave this all behind." Marley's brow furrowed. "And why would I do that? I've worked hard for everything I've built here. You can't buy me." Crane's expression darkened. "Oh, I'm not trying to buy you, Marley. I'm offering you a way out. A way to walk away from all of this before it gets out of hand. Because make no mistake, things are about to escalate." Marley's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening around the wrench she had left on the workbench. "I'm not going anywhere. I've made my choice." Crane sighed, as if he were disappointed. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you're making a mistake, Marley. You've uncovered things you don't understand, things that are far beyond your control." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not the one pulling the strings. You're just a pawn in a much larger game." Marley stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You're wrong. I'm not a pawn. I'm the one in control now." For a long moment, Crane didn't move, his eyes locking with hers. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to her, his hand steady, offering it like a concession. "This is the last chance, Marley," he said, his voice almost sympathetic. "You can take the offer, walk away, and leave all this behind. Or you can keep fighting. But know this, you'll never be truly free. They'll always come after you." Marley stared at the envelope in his hand, then back into his eyes. There was no hesitation in her response. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her life anymore. "No deal," she said firmly, shaking her head. "I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid of what's coming next." Crane seemed to study her for a moment, as though weighing her words, and then, with a slight tilt of his head, he dropped his hand and tucked the envelope back into his coat. His smile returned, but it was colder now, more calculating. "You'll regret this, Marley," he said, his voice almost a warning. "You may think you're in control, but in the end, the game will always play you." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, the sound of the engine roaring to life as he sped off into the distance. Marley stood there, watching him go, the weight of his words lingering in the air. For a moment, the silence of the garage felt suffocating. But then Marley exhaled, letting the tension slip away. She had made her choice. She had fought for this, and she wasn't going to let anyone, Crane, Harris, or anyone else take it from her. The garage, the cars, the legacy, this was her life now. It was hers to protect, to build, to restore. And she wasn't going to let anyone stop her from following her path. She turned back to the Porsche, her fingers brushing the smooth metal, her heart steady with resolve. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Marley Reyes had finally found her place in the world, and no one was going to take it away.